North Carolina, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, John, can you start us off with some background on yourself, like where and when were you born?
I was born in Fredericktown, Missouri in 1946, and I grew up in southeast Missouri, a small town called Marble Hill, Lutesville, which is about 25-30 miles from Cape Girardeau.
Okay, and what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
My father was a shoe factory supervisor, eventually became a plant manager. My mother was in and out part-time housewife, part-time factory worker.
Okay, and how many kids were in the family?
I have a brother and a sister. There were 3 of us.
Okay, and where are you in that sequence?
I was the oldest.
Okay, all right. Now, so you went to high school then in that town?
I went to high school in Bolinger County, Missouri until the end of my junior year. The shoe factory closed. My father relocated to Tennessee, and so I actually graduated from high school in Springfield, Tennessee.
Okay, all right. And what year did you finish high school?
1964.
Okay, and then what did you do after that?
Well, after that, I went to college. First year at Austin Peay State University, which was about 25 miles from us in Clarksville.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I got introduced to the 101st Airborne Division. And then, once again, my father relocated. We went to Cookeville, Tennessee, and when he went there, I transferred to Tennessee Tech. And that's where I got involved with the military ROTC.
Okay, and was there a requirement there that you do the ROTC for 2 years?
Yes, you had 2 years required at that time. Your first 2 years you had to do ROTC. I got in it, liked it. My dad thought being an officer was a cool thing because he was a World War II vet, and he thought officers were pretty cool. And
okay.
so when I got the opportunity, he was very supportive, encouraged me a lot, and I fell into it and enjoyed it.
Okay.
I actually did.
So that's going to be, if you had 1 year at Austin Peay and then so was it after 1 year at Tennessee Tech that you decided to do the full ROTC, or was it after 2 years?
Actually, shortly after I got involved in it, I decided I'd like to go for the commission, so I doubled up.
Okay.
I took double ROTC classes so that I could catch up to my class level.
All right. Now, that's right around the same time that things are kind of beginning to happen in Vietnam. And how aware were you of any of that while you were still in college?
Oh, very aware. I mean, particularly being in the military, in the ROTC program, at least twice a week, I would be involved with active duty military personnel instructors, and we were constantly training with active duty military. Grads would come back and talk to us, send us letters, what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've got at least some idea that you may well be getting into something.
Absolutely.
As you're doing this. Okay, now, and so when do you finish at Tennessee Tech?
Well,
finish as far as you're going to go.
Yeah, I actually should have graduated in 1968.
Mm-hmm.
And I finished my ROTC requirements then. I was, like I said, I was very much into it. I got a Distinguished Military DMS, they called it Distinguished Military Student Designation, which qualified me for a regular commission. And frankly, I was gung-ho and wanted to go. So I guess I played around a little bit too much, and I ended up having to go another year. I was an accounting major, got in trouble in a tax class, got behind, had no chance of completing that course, and realized that, and it was not going to be offered there for a calendar year, so once again I was going to be out of sequence on graduation. going to the Army.
Okay.
Went down and saw the colonel and said, I'd like to apply for a reserve commission.
Okay. So you wouldn't have been able to get the regular Army commission unless you had the college degree?
That's correct.
Okay. But you take the reserve commission, and at that point, probably they're happy to have you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then having done that, then when do you, now you have to do further training before you're really getting a duty assignment, so.
But yeah, I mean,
Okay.
you go to, at that time it's called IOBC, Infantry Officer Basic Course.
Okay, and where is that?
And that was in Fort Benning. As an ROTC officer, I did have some choices to make. And as strange as it might sound, I chose the infantry. My dream sheet, my overseas assignment was Southeast Asia.
Mhm.
I mean, if you have trained for this all of your life or
Mhm.
your training,
Yeah.
you know, it sounds cold, but I want to do it.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, you're not the only person I've ever met even today who has said exactly that. So, yeah, okay. But you've got your own agenda set. Okay. So when do you actually start the basic school?
June the 9th of 1969.
Okay. And what did that program consist of? What were you doing there?
Well, it was primarily classroom work, although you did have, they would call them practical exercises, and even the classroom work, some of it was outdoor classroom, and you learn basic infantry officer skills, map reading, controlling mortar fire, indirect fire, leadership qualities, that sort of thing. I mean, just basic infantry stuff.
Okay. And how much of it was geared toward Vietnam?
Well, the stateside organization was still more of a European TO&E, as they called it, but the training at the infantry school was almost exclusively, the examples were almost exclusively Vietnamese encounters.
Okay. And did you have people training you there who had been there already?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay. And to what extent would they actually tell you about their own experiences, or were they a lot more general with what they said?
It would depend on the individual, but in the classroom, you frequently had videos, and a lot of the diagrams that were on the screens and the walls were of attacks mostly against U.S. troops.
Mm-hmm.
The Vietnamese attacking or patrolling, ambushing, this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All of the training was oriented toward Vietnam because we all knew exactly where we were going.
Mm-hmm.
Just nearly everyone went to Vietnam.
All right. What kind of people were with you in your training class? Do you remember much about them?
In my training class, we were the last class of fiscal year 69. 1369 was our class designation, and you can make of that what you want to. That was our motto.
Mm-hmm.
We had, I would say, probably 50%, maybe not quite, but we had a high percentage of National Guard lieutenants,
Mm-hmm.
and a few regular Army, but mainly reservists. An interesting sideline on that is at the time, the military intelligence lieutenants were required to complete the Infantry Officer Basic Course before they went to MI school.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had you had a fair amount of those. One of my closer associates was an MI officer.
Okay. Now, the ones who were guardsmen, are they training and going back home?
Yep.
Okay. Did they get treated any differently by the instructors than the rest of you?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, it was, the training was the same for everyone. The motivation was perhaps a little different. And sometimes there was an attitude on behalf of the active duty as opposed to the reservists or the National Guardsmen. Actually, the National Guard and Reserve was not a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, I was in the reserves
Yeah.
technically. But those who were on active duty knew those guys were going back home, and there'd be, I don't know of any scuffles or anything
Mm-hmm.
of that nature, but, you know, there'd be some barbs thrown around occasionally.
But you're aware of that difference.
Oh, yeah, very
All right.
aware of it.
Okay, and they said regular Army types. Were there people who were, would that mean, would the West Pointers be trained as a separate bunch?
The
Or-
West Pointers were, I had no West Pointers in my group. They were there, I am pretty sure they were there in the next cycle, but I'm
Mhm.
not
Okay.
positive of that.
And
It
did
was
you
about
have,
the time though, because they graduate, they go immediately to active duty.
and did you have people who were regular Army enlisted who were moving up to officer level?
Yes, you had a lot of, we had, I'll say a lot, there was probably a half a dozen of those guys. They were very obvious because we were all 22, 23 years old, and they were all 29, 30 years
Mm-hmm.
old. They, to us, looked like old guys.
Okay. Now, was this training program a lot more physically demanding than what you had had in ROTC?
Oh, as far as physically demanding compared to ROTC, yes, absolutely. In ROTC, you're still a college student, and of course, I joined what was called Tech Rangers because I wanted to. And we went out and played Army and all that kind of thing. You know, we did PT and took the PT test because a part of that training is you went to summer camp between your junior and senior year, and that summer camp was akin to basic training for the enlisted guys.
Okay.
And so you did quite a bit of physical work then, but mainly you did calisthenics and things like this and IOBC, and we marched a little bit from the quad to infantry hall. You would march a little bit, but most of the time we did not do road marches.
Okay.
We took buses and cattle cars, things out to the training sites, and in that respect, it was not physically demanding. Ranger schools where you get into real physical demanding stuff.
Now, after you finished Infantry Officer Basic, did you go on to any other schools or training?
I did not. I went directly to Fort Riley, Kansas, and got into the 24th Infantry Division. I was a platoon leader in a mechanized infantry division out there for roughly 6 months, and I was very grateful for that opportunity. I thought it served me well before I went to Vietnam. When I was in college, when I was a senior in college, I was sort of like it was when I was a senior in high school. As you're growing up, you think those guys are, you know, they know everything. They're, you know, and when I got to be a senior in high school, I thought, I'm a dummy. I don't know squat about what's going on, you know. And I thought the same thing when I was in college. And I thought, wow, seniors are so smart, you know. And then I got to be a senior. I'm like, I'm not really up on the world here. And so the opportunity to serve as a platoon leader with, at that time, about 40 guys in a TO&E platoon, and to go out and do real live map reading, even in the plains of Kansas, where you had 3 grid lines on, on a map. It gave me the confidence that I needed to step in front of a platoon in Vietnam, because
Right.
I had dealt with the leadership challenges. Even though no one was really shooting at me, I still felt confident that I could do it.
Okay. Now, the men in your platoon, were these all relatively new recruits who hadn't been anywhere, or did you have some people who'd been in there, like any of the sergeants who'd been
You were
someplace else?
talking about out at Fort Riley?
Yes.
I really believe that every single one of them were Vietnam vets.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was quite common for guys to go to Vietnam, get injured, and be reassigned stateside to serve out their last year, 6 months,
Mhm.
stuff like that. Of course, all of the lieutenants were rookies,
Yep.
and so every month we had a farewell and hail to welcome new lieutenants and to say goodbye to the old ones, and 99% of those were going to Vietnam. When I was actually in processing making the transition or the trip from the States to Vietnam, I was reading the Stars and Stripes, and they would publish casualty lists,
Mhm.
and it's pretty sobering to sit down and read that and find 3 guys in there that you knew from Fort Riley
Mm-hmm.
that you had just said goodbye to 2 or 3, 4 months earlier,
Right.
so get your attention.
Sure. Now, the men in your platoon, they're veterans. I mean, did they talk to you about Vietnam, or?
They did. I mean, it wasn't like there was any big secret. It wasn't like they were ashamed of it or anything of this nature. It was sort of interesting because some people in the infantry feel like they were too dumb to do anything else. I didn't feel that way.
Mhm.
But other people, I remember a sergeant having a conversation with him, and he said, I used to worry about what people thought of me, but it feels good to have a CIB on
Mm-hmm.
and have a right shoulder patch, and I'm not ashamed of my Purple Heart, A lot of the talk, of course, from the lower ranking enlisted men, they didn't want to be there in the first place, so they're going to have a negative attitude about the whole process,
Mhm.
and they're telling you, how screwed up things are and all this sort of thing. Just typical Army talk. But, we did talk about Vietnam a lot.
Yeah. But I mean, did anybody going to talk to you about how to be an effective officer, or things to watch out for, what to do or not to do?
Not so much.
Okay.
Not so much about that. It was mainly, at that time, in 1969, 1970 in the Army, your enlisted troops reflected a whole lot of the attitude of America.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty negative, and you just got a whole lot of how screwed up Vietnam was. The sooner we get out of there, the better. They should just shut it down and walk off and leave it, that kind of thing.
Right.
And they would, sometimes they would say, we had a good LT, but he got killed.
Mm-hmm.
That makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And then, of course, most of the time they're saying, CO was screwed up, LT was screwed up, we had this lifer, first sergeant, and all this kind of stuff. So you get a wide variety of that, but it was not, there wasn't much encouragement, let's put it that way.
Okay. Did you have any problems getting them to follow orders or do what you wanted them to do?
Not really. I mean, I think I can't really say how it is in the volunteer army, but most of them were draftees. So you always have a leadership and motivational effort that is required. And you didn't have a whole lot of just guff and back talk. I mean, it is the Army. You did have some troops that were screw-ups. Most of them were just run-of-the-mill guys, good old, hard-working, middle-class Americans that all they wanted to do was go home.
Yeah. So they'll do their jobs and
Yeah.
get that done.
Yeah.
And go forward.
I
Okay.
mean, you know, it's you're playing Army at stateside, and we trained in the 24th Division, which was incidentally the home of the 1st Division. I served in the 1st Division for about a week. When they were withdrawn from Vietnam, we simply took the Terra leaf off and put the first Big Red 1 on, and that was the withdrawal. And so it was, you know, you had some playing Army is not the same as the biggest difference that I saw in the Army in the States. You had some jobs that, you know, the S3 shop and the S4 shop, they had a role, but you didn't really seem like, you didn't see them in the same light as you did in Vietnam. In Vietnam, every job was important. Every job was really doing something, whether it was supporting, planning, whatever. You know,
For the outside audience, S3 is operations, S4 is supply. Is that-
Supply,
yeah.
yes.
Okay. All right. So you spend about 6 months or whatever on that assignment. Okay. And then when do you get your orders for Vietnam? When do you get your orders for Vietnam?
got orders for Vietnam probably in February of 1970, I'm thinking. It was shortly after the first year.
Okay. And then did you get to leave home before you went over?
Yep,
or-
I went home in, I believe it was in March, and spent basically 30 days. By this time, my folks had moved to Kentucky. I had married a girl from Kentucky, and so we went home for about a 30-day leave.
Okay.
And then I went to jungle school in Panama.
All right. And what was that like?
Jungle school was, in some ways, it was Mickey Mouse. In other ways, it was fun. And I mean, it was to me, it was beneficial because it did acclimate me to operating or navigating in a jungle terrain. And it was in a nice climate. And it was the first time that I had been outside of the United States, and you know, in an area where people didn't speak the language and this sort of stuff. And realistically, we did not have a lot of interface
Right.
with the local population, but most of the instructors down there were Hispanic background, and a lot of those had a working knowledge of English. You know, a lot of the instruction was somewhat difficult to understand for a country boy from Kentucky. You know,
All right. And how much of it wound up being at all relevant to Vietnam, at least for your experience?
you're talking about jungle school
Yeah.
now. I thought it was pretty relevant because, mainly because of the map reading. Other than that, I mean, we did stream crossing, and occasionally you did stream crossing in Vietnam, you know. So I would not say at all that it was a waste of time, and at the same time, I wouldn't say that it was just, you know, the greatest thing since sliced bread either, you know.
Okay. But it did count toward your year overseas, though, right?
Yes, it did.
All right.
It did.
Okay. So you completed that. You had your leave home and so forth. So when do you actually leave to go to Vietnam?
Well, immediately after left jungle school, we had, I believe it was something like 5 days to make it to, they flew us back to Charleston, South Carolina, and they said, okay, you got 5 days to make it to San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm not being real smart, but I had enough sense to know, hey, between here and San Francisco is Kentucky. So I went home for about 2 days and had a great time and actually felt better about leaving. The first time I left, when I was going to jungle school, I didn't know that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And my father cried at the airport, and that bothered me a lot. And the next time, we were all smiles. I felt like, I don't know why, but I felt like I was going to make it then, you know.
Right.
And so I had like that layover there and went to San Francisco. I was there maybe 2 days, no longer than 2 days. And I don't remember much about the process there. I remember riding through I arrived at night, rode through the streets of San Francisco and saw the hills and all that stuff, and I thought, just like the Rice-A-Roni commercials, you know. It was cool, and we, one thing that was interesting to me was we went to a bar just off the base there at night, and as soon as we walked in, of course we ordered a drink, but the rest of the night, the locals were buying us drinks, and I found that in San Francisco to be strange. I mean, I did not expect that at all. They were very supportive of us.
Of course, that's right next to the base there in Oakland or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, maybe they benefited from it being there or something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know why, but it was a surprise.
Yeah. And after, I guess, but by this time you're pretty aware of anti-war activity and all
Absolutely.
of that.
Yeah.
So,
One of the guys that one of the captains that I served with at Fort Riley, I noticed that he had not been to Vietnam. I asked him about it, and he said, I was on the way to Vietnam, and I'm from San Francisco. I was on the way to Vietnam, and I got caught up in an anti-war rally, and I ended up getting shot. and so, you know, it kind of messed his cycle up.
yeah.
But I thought that was pretty strange. But yes, the anti-war movement was very much alive and well.
That's right. And you had said that you were even aware of that among your own enlisted personnel when you were at Fort Riley.
Oh, sure.
Okay. All right. So now from here, is this a chartered civilian jet that you take or a
Yes.
military? Okay.
No, it was a civilian plane, longest flight I'd ever been on, and we flew to Alaska, and then we flew from there to Japan, and from Japan on to Vietnam.
Okay. And where did you land in Vietnam?
Bien Hoa.
Okay.
And Long Binh, 90th replacement.
Right. And how long did you spend there?
Not long, probably 3 days at the most. I mean, you in process, again, you know, it's different for officers than it is for enlisted men. You had a dream sheet there too, and I chose 101st.
Because not everybody got handed one of those, as far as I can tell, even among the officers. Sometimes you're just going this place. But so you didn't have specific orders when you went over.
No.
You get assigned out of there.
Go to a replacement depot, and then they make assignments as, I guess, is required. You know.
Okay. And now you're assigned to the 101st. And
Yes.
how did they get you up there?
We flew by C-130. Sort of interesting in Long Binh. Fairly stateside feeling. I mean, they had clubs. That was the first time that I had seen slot machines. They had slot machines in clubs. It was just very much easygoing. and then from there we flew to Da Nang, and from Da Nang to Hue Phu Bai, and the further north you went, the more primitive the facilities became. And at Phu Bai, they had places where you put a helmet upside down in they had like I don't know, a board along the wall, and you shave out of a helmet upside down, you know. You knew you were going into a war zone then.
All right. Now, did you know at this point what unit of the 101st you would join, or were you still waiting for that?
No, you just, you do the CERTS training, Screaming Eagle Replacement
Training school, probably.
Center or something
Yeah.
like that. And after that, or while that's going on, you're assigned. And I had a friend that he and I kind of went through the whole process together. He got assigned to the 3rd of the 06, shipped off to Cambodia, and I was assigned to Delta 1st of the 06.
Okay. And now the CERTS training, what did that consist of?
That was oriented toward 101st SOP, I guess you would call it. This is the way we operate. You were introduced, and there it was everyone was mixed. I mean, enlisted officers, the whole 9 yards. Everybody did the same training. You were taught some of the practical skills, repelling from helicopters, repelling off walls, booby traps, refresher training on the weapons, and just basically the 101st way.
Right. So did you do patrols and that kind of thing too?
We did a road march out to a range or to a classroom that was outside the wire.
Mm-hmm.
We did not do, to my recollection, we did not do a patrol as such.
Okay. And about how long did that school go?
I think it's 5 days.
Okay. All right. And so now you're assigned to D Company, 1st Battalion, 506th Regiment, 101st. All right. And then how were you introduced to them? Or how do you meet them at Camp Evans or somewhere else?
Yes, Camp Evans was our base camp, and when we were, Lieutenant Thompson and I were coming in together, and at that time, the Battalion XO met us at CERTS, took us to the 3rd Brigade Officers Club. We went to the briefing every I think like 1,700 hours, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They had a briefing of the activity, and then we stood around the back, staying out of the way, colonels and that sort of thing. And then we went to the Officers Club. He told Thompson and myself that he was assigning us to the best company commander in the battalion. He said, someday you'll be Chief of Staff of the Army. I don't know if that would have ever happened or not, but he said, this guy is really a good commander. You're very lucky. And we got there and found out that there were no other officers present because every last one of them had been killed. And so we were the replacements for 2 officers that had just been killed. One officer died the day that we were assigned, but he had been injured earlier.
Okay. Now, when is this that you joined the company?
This was in late May
Okay.
of 1970.
All right. And what had just gone on? What had happened to that company shortly that
Well,
got these people
just
killed?
prior to that, in early May, the 2nd platoon had been hit hard on an abandoned fireplace, or abandoned, I guess is the term, called Maureen. The platoon leader was killed. They had heavy casualties, both in terms of death and injured.
Mm-hmm.
And we were about a week from stand down when Randy and I signed into the company. And Ranger said, well, there's no point in bringing you guys out here for just 2 or 3 days. Second platoon had been so decimated that they had been absorbed by first and third platoon, what was left. So they were operating as 2 platoons, and he said, I don't want to try to reorganize things out here, so you guys just stay in the rear, and we'll reorganize the company when we come in for stand down, which was like the first week of June.
Okay. Now the fellow that you referred to as Ranger, that would have been
Don Workman.
and he's the captain, company commander. So that's the one that your other officer was referring to.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So now basically you sit around, but now finally the men come back in from the field. So that the stand down, and now things start to reorganize, and you all get introduced.
Right.
Okay.
We get introduced to the company. Actually, I had the opportunity to fly out. I was the pay officer, and which struck me as strange because you go out and pay the troops with no place to spend it. And I did have the opportunity to meet him on that pay mission. And as the pay officer, of course, your paying was cash script, but I had a roster of everybody in the company and how much money they were owed, and I sort all that out by name and individual, wrap it up, so it's all accounted for. Came across a guy named Dean Finch, who was from Fredericktown, Missouri, which is the neighboring county to, well, it's where I was actually born, where my father was from, his home, and so we struck up a sort of a friendship, kinship kind of thing, and I was glad that he actually turned out to be one of my troops in the second platoon. But that gave me an opportunity to meet him and a few others, and Ranger.
All right. Now, once you're all back together at the stand down there, what happens in terms of reorganizing the company and getting ready to go back out?
Well, that's the purpose of the stand down, obviously. We're standing down to get cleaned up, you get clean fatigues, you shower, you eat decent food. We did a little training. We went out and zeroed the weapons. And it's mainly a time of rest and relaxation for the troops.
Now, did the company take replacements at that point to kind of build up its strength?
We started getting replacements in, but they were still very small. After the stand down, we actually went to the Ripcord AO to relieve 2nd of the 06 while they came in for stand down.
Okay.
But we were still pretty under strength, although we did have 3 platoons operating at the time. First platoon CA'd in to the west of Ripcord, I believe it was, and 2nd and 3rd platoon walked off of Ripcord. And I had about 20 people, maybe not even that many. Some of the remnants of 2nd platoon did not want to continue to serve in 2nd platoon, asked to be transferred because I believe 2nd platoon was sort of considered a hard luck platoon. I think they had been mauled before, even before Marine.
Yeah, there had been an earlier bad fight.
There's some people that didn't want to be in 2nd platoon anymore, and so there was a lot of shifting around, and I had probably 50% new guys, including, you've got a cherry lieutenant.
Okay. Now, you said, so you were 2nd platoon. So 2nd platoon was one of the ones that marched off of Ripcord. So
Yes.
did you fly in helicopters to Ripcord and then okay.
And,
now, do you remember that flight? Do you remember going out and taking a look at the terrain?
we were, if I remember correctly, we were on a Chinook going out that time. And when you're in a Chinook, you don't see much.
Yeah.
It's about like riding in a C-130, but you don't have wings, you know.
Okay, so you're just there.
Yeah.
And did you get a look at things from the top of Ripcord, or did you just march off?
We weren't there very long, just long enough to kind of get organized. I did pick up a medic at the fire base, and basically we immediately marched off.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now,
I would say the thing that impressed me about it was very steep on the sides,
mhm.
and I'm standing here thinking there is no way that the dinks will ever come up that hill. This has got to be a good place to be.
Well, I didn't ever get up while we were there.
It never came to pass. But
Yeah. Okay. But now you're going to go out. You're going to patrol the jungle and the hills immediately around it.
yes,
So you're doing this now. This is June. Now, did you make much contact, or was it fairly quiet?
we saw nothing. I mean, we saw bunkers,
Mm-hmm.
empty. Had no probes of a perimeter. Had no contact during that. We were only there 1 week to relieve 2nd
Right.
Battalion, but you know, there was nothing there that we saw. That doesn't mean they weren't there, but we didn't see them.
Right. Now, was this sort of good practice for you on some level, just getting used to leading the men in the
Absolutely.
jungle?
Yes, yeah. I mean, again, that confidence thing, you know, the first time you go out there, you just wouldn't believe how physically demanding it is to hump a rock that weighs a third as much as you do. I mean, don't look like it now, but at that time I weighed about 150 pounds. My rucksack probably weighed 50 pounds or very close to 40 pounds or something like that. I mean, it was heavy.
Now, is that not including water or other stuff, or are you adding that in?
No, I'm including your load.
Okay.
I mean, you got your ammo and the whole thing. Take off down the hill, and you're sweating to going down the hill, and then you start going up the hill, and it was really vicious. So yes, I was very glad that we didn't see anything, and it gave me an opportunity to talk to Ranger that week quite a bit. Ranger instilled trust, at least in me, and I think with most of the troops. They really felt like he had his act together.
Mhm.
Now, there were some people that thought he was gung-ho. I was not one of them. He was a no-nonsense. He was not a joker, you know. But he was very, I felt like he did care about his men.
When you were doing this first week of patrolling, did the company stay together, or did you separate as platoons?
2nd and 3rd platoon stayed together the whole week. 1st platoon operated independently.
Okay. And did Ranger keep his CP with you guys most of the time, or did he go back and forth?
Well, we actually were just one large
Right.
unit. The CP was with 2nd and 3rd
Yeah.
platoon. And so when we set up, I mean, we would have 2nd platoon over here, 3rd platoon completing the circle,
Right.
CP in the middle.
Right. Now, did you have any experienced soldiers in your platoon who were able to kind of help break you in or show you what to do, or were you pretty much on your own?
I was blessed. The first time out, I had an E6 platoon sergeant serving on a 2nd tour. His name was Bustamante, and he very much, again, it was that steadying factor. I trusted him. He was very calm, and he was, I think he was Puerto Rican, Hispanic. Spoke with a little bit of an accent, but I mean, he was very, very good, and he would tell me, here's what we need to do, and I relied on him a lot to get us started.
Mm-hmm.
Other than him, highest ranking was shake and bake E5s,
Mhm.
and that was they were all kids.
Mhm.
I mean, most of them were draftees, maybe had a year of college or something like this, but not necessarily. I mean, they just had some leadership traits that the Army in their wisdom identified as potential, and they went to NCO school. NCO school, I mean, I think it was a good program. Certainly it was better than just bringing them up from the ranks with the limited experience that they would have had to make buck sergeant.
Yeah.
But you just really did not have experienced NCOs. By that time, you did not have experienced NCOs in the field.
Mhm.
And then Bustamante he had signed up for the 4th Division. That's where he wanted to be.
Mhm.
And he got sent to the 101st. And he went to the IG, I think, and anyhow, he complained, and he was only with us about 2 weeks, and he got reassigned to the 4th Division, where he wanted to be.
Right.
And so then, it was me and 3, 4, 5 buck sergeants.
Mhm.
And the oldest one of them, or the most senior one of them, became my platoon sergeant.
All right. Did you have any Spec 4s who had been with the unit for a while, or did you just have
Yeah,
privates?
yeah, you had some. The majority of them though were new guys.
Yeah.
And even the spec, I mean, even the E5s that I had, they had been there maybe a month before I got there. A lot of them came in after Maureen,
Yeah.
or just before Maureen.
Right. Okay. Now, so you have about a week in the field, and then, well, you're kind of in the Ripcord AO, and then what happens to you next?
After Ripcord, we went to Catherine, and we were still rebuilding, and the battalion commander put us on the Firebase to pull Firebase security while we restocked. And we were there a long time, nearly a month on the Firebase.
Mhm.
And we were getting new, they trickle in 1 or 2 guys at a time, every day. Get a new guy or 2. And we did maintenance on the wire. We tried to improve the defenses. Did some very local patrolling, ambushing, but mainly we were there, and Ranger was concerned that we were losing our edge. Firebase duty, believe it, was much desired by the troops in the field, because even though you were out in the boondocks and you did occasionally, I mean, you obviously stood the risk of a full-scale sapper attack,
Mhm.
but occasionally you get incoming in and that sort of thing, and it wasn't, but still yet you had bunkers, you slept and ate much better. If it rained, you could generally get some shelter, out in the boondocks. I remember the daggum rain running down my back trying to sleep in that,
Mhm.
because we did not have ponchos, and we didn't put up shelter halves to shield us from the weather, because they shine at night, and they make noise.
Mhm.
We didn't have air mattresses because they make noise. So it was roughing it out there. And Rangers was anxious to get us off the Firebase, and I was anxious to get out the field. Like I said, I wanted to get out there.
Now, if you're on a fire base, I mean, do you have, guys using marijuana or doing other stuff they shouldn't be?
That might have happened. I honestly believe that happened much on the fire base. Now, in the rear
Yeah.
and on the, at the base camp,
Mhm.
like I said, I ran a bunker line there for 4 or 5 months, and it was very prevalent there. But in the field, you did not have that kind of an issue, and even on the fire base, you were still so close together, and still you knew that there was a very high risk out there. People wanted to go home,
Right.
and they weren't going to, get stoned out there, or they weren't going to allow the next position to have a bunch of purple haze around.
Right. Okay. So you do, now while you were at Catherine, did the base get attacked at all?
We had a few scares incoming, but it was always just a lob,
You set up a mortar, shoot a couple rounds, and go away before you get them.
Yeah, I mean, it was, we didn't have anything serious. We did have a couple guys that died on the fire base in an incident that was never fully explained, understood. I mean, there was a huge explosion one night, and started hearing radio traffic about 2 guys are missing, and they couldn't find them, and their fighting position was damaged very badly, and there was, as far as I know, we still don't know what actually happened, but they ended up finding them first day, next morning, and they were killed. There was speculation that a Kit Carson had sabotaged the thing. There was also speculation that there was actually an incoming round or an RPG round, but and there was also speculation it was just a plain old accident because you had, we all had a big supply of grenades, and occasionally we would throw a grenade, just H&I kind of stuff, harassment and interdiction. We were authorized to do that, so it could have been somebody dropped a grenade and caused an explosion, and that was always a mystery, and it's disturbing. But as far as actually getting hit on the fire base, nope, didn't happen.
And then, when did you move off of the fire base then?
We, I don't know exactly when it was, but it was in, I believe, shortly after July the 4th.
Okay.
Like July the 10th or something of this nature. Because July the 1st, I believe it was, Ripcord started taking incoming.
Yeah.
And like I said, we've been there just a couple weeks before, and Ranger, we always had a platoon leader meeting, about 1,600, something like that. And so he said, by the way, Ripcord's taking incoming today. And so didn't really think much about it. Next day, Ripcord's still taking incoming. Wow. And every day it was more of the same. Ripcord's still taking incoming. What is going on? We just couldn't believe it. That went on for a long time. And like I said, shortly after that, maybe the 10th or so, we moved off of Catherine, and we went to a completely different AO, and I frankly just cannot remember where that was, except it was south.
Yep.
And I don't know where it was.
And now were you just patrolling jungle? Or?
Yes, yeah. We were just doing what was known as reconnaissance and force, RIFs. That was so much of the action in Vietnam, and just the opposite of what I had kind of envisioned. In my mind, I was going to be attacking a known position. Although my guys at Fort Riley said, never happened.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to attack you. You're going to walk into ambushes constantly. And still, yeah, I guess you just, I wasn't really prepared for that. But they initiated, the NVA initiated 90% of the contact, And so that was what we were doing for, I guess it was about a week,
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Okay. And were you running into any enemy in that time?
Still no contact.
Okay.
Everything had, still quiet. Delta Company was, again, it was a new, a lot of new guys in there. We needed the training, and I guess I was felt fortunate that we had not hit anything.
Mm-hmm.
I was not the kind of guy that wanted to go looking for trouble. I wanted to be ready if we had trouble. And so that was kind of my attitude. And so I was not disappointed in that respect.
All right. Now that world's going to change pretty soon.
Absolutely. We assembled down near Highway 1, and frankly, I cannot remember if we convoyed back to Evans or if we flew back. But anyhow, we went back to Evans, and when we got there, we knew before we got to Evans, we were told that we were going to be going into the Ripcord AO. And when we got there, it was rainy, nasty weather, and so whenever it was, I'm thinking it was kind of like mid-afternoon. They said, well, we can't get you in today because of the weather, but tomorrow we'll be going to the field. So we had a one day, one night stand down. One of my friends, for some reason or other, prevailed upon me to run the bunker line for him that night. So I took off and ran the bunker line for Blue Sector for Camp Evans that night, and the rest of them had a big party.
Yeah.
And everybody was, later I saw pictures of that party, and I said, how the hell that happened? I don't remember that. And then I remember, you were on the bunker line playing Army, and they were having a big time. But it was famously called the Last Supper because the next morning we did make it out to the Ripcord AO.
Okay. Now, did the enlisted men know they were going out there, or just the lieutenants?
The enlisted men were aware of it.
Okay.
Ranger took us into his office that day, took me and Thompson and Frazier. Frazier was an E6, acting as the 3rd platoon leader. He took us to his office and said, you guys need to get your cherries ready for combat. We're going into the Ripcord AO, and we will make contact.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't have to be told that, you knew it, But I walked back out and told my platoon sergeant exactly what he told us. He said, get your guys, make sure they've got clean ammo, make sure they've got everything they're supposed to have, and get them mentally, try to get them into a frame of mind of being ready for combat.
Mm-hmm.
Because in combat, it's, you can be dead right. You can do everything right and still end up in a bad place.
Mm-hmm.
So a whole lot of it is just mental. Either you get shot or you don't get shot, but how you react to it has to come from the soul, your heart, and your desire to defeat the enemy, to survive.
Okay. Now, you haven't really seen combat at this point yet either.
Nope.
All right. So now, next day, what happens?
Next day, we went out to, as a company, we CA'd into an LZ. It was sort of interesting because when we came into the LZ, I mean, this is something like, my guess is 18th, 17th
Yep.
of July.
Yep.
And hotter and blue blazes, and we CA into this LZ, and there are bandages, boots, all kinds of crap laying around. Obviously, somebody had had a bad day there. And so, still yet being a rookie, that's just all a day's work, you know. So we took off, all of us assigned to our different areas. We stayed pretty close together there, a little closer together than we normally operated. But we all took off down the trail, and you would go a ways, stop, set up a patrol base, riff around, and by mid-afternoon you were looking for a place to establish a night defensive perimeter. And once you selected the NDP, you'd send out patrols.
Okay. We're going to stop here. All right. Now, we've gotten into about July 18th or thereabouts, and we brought you into the Ripcord AO, and you're patrolling around, and you had seen the odd bandages and other stuff when you landed, but how long does it take before you actually make contact, or what happens in the first couple days you're out there?
The first 2 or 3 days, again, we're just out there hiking around in the woods looking for the bad guys. We saw a few bunkers. One particular patrol that I was leading for 2nd Platoon, we came into 2 things that actually were remarkable for me, because it was very hot then, and we found a great stream of water and pigged out and filled up our canteens, and it was just great. But you're out there sneaking around trying to be quiet and all this sort of stuff, and all of a sudden we came up on a bare open area in a cave directly to our front. And immediately on top of the hill was the rest of the company, and we were going to NDP there that night. So we had to check that cave out, and that was a pretty high pucker factor. I didn't want to send anybody over there, so I did it myself. And fortunately, there was nothing there. We hiked back up to the top of the hill, and it was an uneventful night. And I believe that was the last night that we spent in that part of the AO. The next day, we were told we were going to be moved to another area. And so we went back to the LZ that we had come in on, and organized to move to a new LZ, a new AO.
Okay.
And we resupplied that morning, loaded up on helicopters. 1st Platoon was leading the charge, 2nd Platoon was second in, and 3rd Platoon followed us. We had sectors assigned to us, to the north and the south of the LZ, and we got mail that morning. I read a letter from my wife confirming that my first son was indeed on the way. And we had resupply, cigarettes, water, life is good. Hop in the helicopters, and the first lift takes off for first platoon, and the same bird come back to pick up second platoon. First platoon was assigned to secure the south side of the LZ, and we were assigned to secure the north side. And so we take off, and you get up to, you're so hot on the ground, you get up in the air, and it is cool. It is nice. Sitting here all, you know. And as we approach the LZ, it was sort of funny because I experienced the same sensation when I watched a movie called Apocalypse Now. You're going into it, you see the LZ to your front. You see, and it's like a magnet. It's just like you're going there, come hell or high water, you know. And at that point, I was enjoying the ride. We did not know that it was hot, but you know, as we got closer, and just before we got there, all of a sudden the door gunners start firing their 60s that are mounted on the side of a Huey, and they got this concerned look on their face, and I'm going, what is going on? And they started saying, it's hot, it's hot. And so again, you know, it was sort of funny because emotionally, I was sitting on the floor, my legs are hanging out. All of a sudden, I felt like my chest and head was 6 feet tall, and my legs were 20 feet long, and I just felt very exposed, you know. And you just, there's nothing you can do about it. You're going into that place, pop, 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 you know. And then just before you touch down, they're saying, get off of here, get off of here. Well, we were still 5, 6 feet in the air, you know, not high, you know, but you jump before the bird actually touches the ground. You got this ruck on your back, wham, and so my introduction to combat is boom, boom, upside down. I'm laying there confused. I couldn't tell which end was up, you know. And I thought, the very first thing that I thought, my dad begged me not to go into the infantry, and I absolutely insisted on it. And I thought, oh my God, my dad worked hard to put me through college, and I insisted on getting into this hellhole. What kind of a butt am I, you know? And that just went through my mind. Then I kind of came to my senses that you don't want to die on the LZ. And so we started acting like soldiers then. And we secured our side of the LZ, first platoon went to the other side, and then we were on the ground. Didn't see any activity at that point, but then when the next lift started coming in with Ranger and the rest of the company, then it started all over again. And how much of it was, you know, we're firing suppressive fire, and it's hard to tell how much fire you're taking, in, you know, the other way, because it's very noisy, very confusing. But got everybody on the ground. Look around, my platoon sergeant's not there. What's going on, you know? Finally, he shows up. I said, where you been? The bird that he was on got shot up so badly that they couldn't land, and they went back to Evans and got another helicopter, and so he got brought in late. And so meanwhile, we're milling around there, getting organized to secure the highland to our north. And almost just out of the blue, 3 NVA literally walked into our perimeter. I mean, there's a trail going up the hill to our front. And these 3 guys just walked in, sling arms, one of them had a hoe and two of them had AKs. And, typical of me, every time the action starts, my back's to it, but, I'm standing here looking this way and I hear somebody behind me say, "Dinks!" And then, brrr, it just goes crazy, Turn around and these guys are still in the air being knocked down by M60 machine gun fire. Just drilled them. And that was the first time that I saw an enemy combat casualty. I was struck by my lack of feeling. I didn't know how I would feel, but it just, I didn't feel anything. I mean, it's just, that's the business I'm in.
Okay. Now, do things quiet down after that, or what happens now?
For us, it quieted down. The rest of the day, we spent getting organized, and then we went, I took a patrol up the hill from the direction, in the direction that there was three guys had come from. We got near the top and we saw fresh dirt. Didn't know what was up there. Didn't see anybody moving around, but obviously they had come from that area, so we didn't know what was there. We fired it up with ARA, or Cobras, and then we got online and we fired, swept the top of the hill and secured the hilltop until the remainder of the company joined us, and that was where we had our NDP for the 2nd and 3rd platoon. 1st platoon, meanwhile, was on the other side of the LZ. We were, my guess is, about 500 meters between the two positions, probably 200 to the LZ from each side. I didn't know too much about what was going on the other side, and we were digging in the best we could in our area, and that was, by that time, it's surprising how fast time passes and how much you sweat during combat operations. It's very fatiguing, but about, my guess is around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 16 or so, all of a sudden I heard all hell break loose from 1st platoon of the area, and started getting the radio. The ranger and the company CP is there with us, so I'm listening to him, and found out that they had casualties. They were, I was expecting to be sent over there to reinforce them, but then by this time it's getting close to dark. I mean, I don't know what time it was, but instead of being sent over there, he said, "Go down and secure the LZ. We got to get medevacs in here." And so I took a patrol down there, secured the LZ, such as it was. I mean,
How big was the LZ? I mean,
the LZ was a big LZ. Normally, you could easily have landed 2 ships there. It was in a saddle, and it had been cleared, and it was a great LZ. So I went down there and secured the LZ, and then I was informed that I was to bring back what was left of 1st platoon to join us on the north hilltop. I saw them bringing their casualties down. Saw Lieutenant Thompson, who had kind of gone through the training with me and all this sort of stuff. He comes down and has a bandage around his arm, and it looks, just very white, and it looks like it's glowing. And these guys looked very shocked. I mean, it was just, they were You could tell they have been in a very harrowing situation. And not only that, Randy, I ran up to him and asked him how he was doing, and he said he's doing okay, but he said, I had to leave people on the hill. Bad news.
Yeah.
And we went back, I'm sorry, we went back up the hill,
How are
spent
you?
the night. I was amazed at how easily sleep came, because you just exhausted, and I could not imagine somebody going to sleep, but I actually had trouble myself staying awake, because you pull shifts.
Now, at this point, has the enemy probed your positions at all, or is it still quiet? On your end?
We've got a listening post out, and at sometime during the night, I'm hearing radio traffic, and they wake me up and stuff, and they said, the LP said, we got movement out here. And so we got everybody up, and I thought that we were going to be hit. They were wanting to come in, Ranger wouldn't let them come in, because an LP is like 3 people, maybe 50 meters out there, very lonely, and they didn't see anything, but they heard things. And a lot of times that is false movement, but you had every reason to believe that it's real. So everybody was on edge, and nothing happened. And then, of course, I knew that our mission the next day was going to be to go down and recover the bodies that had been left on the hill from 1st Platoon. And I can't say I was dreading that in a way, but it was also, it was something I wanted to do. I mean, for 2 reasons. One, I felt obligated that first and foremost, we had to go get those guys. And secondly, this was what I felt like we knew where they were, and we were going to go down there, and we were going to kick some butt and retrieve our casualties. And of course, this is early in the morning, 6, something like it, first light. About this time, I started hearing pops, and maybe I was just heightened in my sensitivity or whatever, but I heard these pops. I thought, that sounds like mortars. And I heard in a few seconds, pop, boom, boom, and that's mortars. And so about that time, pop again, and the mortars are closer to us. And by this time, Rangers identified the same thing, and he's trying to call in counter battery fire. And I'm running around telling my guys, hey, get in whatever holes you got, we're going to get hit. Then when that second group hit, I knew the next ones would be on us. My experience, and then prior to that, and kind of what I had been told, was the dinks will fire a few rounds in and that's it. So I was expecting 3, 6, 8 rounds, just pop, 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 and man, it didn't happen. I mean, they nailed us. They obviously had an observer fire for effect. I mean, when I was in training, if I had seen anything near that, I thought nobody's going to survive that. But actually, we came through that pretty good. We lost a couple guys as far as death goes. We had a lot of guys injured,
Mm-hmm.
including myself. You know, we nearly everyone, I probably one hand could tell you that could count the ones that were not injured in some way. But we did take a couple casualties, a couple kilos there. One being my medic. Just unbelievable situation for me. But it's also amazing to me is how your training takes over. So finally, we decided to, the ranger decided we had to get off that hill. We got to get out of the kill zone.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of going north, we went back toward the LZ, which in some way the textbook solution would say you don't go back the way you came.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, given what happened after that, I think that if we had gone north, we would have walked into an ambush.
Mm-hmm.
But we went back toward the LZ and started, making arrangements to get our casualties out. Sent a patrol. We in our haste to get off the hill, we had left a machine gun up there.
Mm-hmm.
We sent a patrol back up the hill to get that. Just as soon as we got down there, we realized it was still up there. And that was probably 200 meters, 200 to 300 meters. And by the time that patrol got up there, the dinks were on the hill.
Mm-hmm. And
They had a brief firefight, no casualties. They did retrieve the machine gun, and so we got it back down there. And brought the machine gun in and set it down in the middle of the perimeter. And again, we're waiting for medevacs. And all of a sudden, somebody yelled dinks again, and just all broke loose. I mean, we were shooting in and out, and just very noisy. And it was over fairly quickly. And this is all going on over a period of time. The helicopters are coming in then to pick up wounded. We had a medevac that got shot down on the LZ. I think it was a medevac. I know a ship did get shot down. And we had another, during this time, we had another ground attack. And again, it was not a long, sustained thing, but Ranger had, in the meantime, started calling in ARA. And if I remember correctly, we even had fast movers, jets. And I just know that he at one time was saying, get down, get everybody down low because they're going to be close. And we were taking stuff flying through the air over our heads. It was that close. Mm-hmm. And I honestly believe that's what broke up the ground attack and saved us even more casualties than we had already suffered. By the time we withdrew, at the end of the day, we only had about, in my estimation, probably 25 to 30 guys. We probably had 2/3 of our guys had been extracted, either or were dead. Mm-hmm. And so it was one long day, exhausted. And earlier in the afternoon, we had been told that we were going to stay there that night, mm-hmm. which I thought was insane, which violated every principle that I had been taught, and I could not believe that we were preparing to stay there. But Rangers said, dig deep, because we're going to stay here tonight. And at that moment, my morale probably hit its low point, because I felt like that if we stayed there that night, we were really going to get hit hard. And then For whatever reason, I have no idea. We had been reinforced by Delta Company from the 2nd of the 06 at some time in the afternoon.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, Hire changed their mind and said we're going to be extracted. Our guys, Delta, 1st of the 06, felt like got a bad rap in Nolan's book,
Yeah.
and I told him so. We got our butt kicked. We did. But we didn't quit, as was implied. Ranger, during the day, I've been hit in the lower back, and he said, if you want to go in, you can go in, but I don't have any other lieutenants out here. And I said, Ranger, the only way I'm leaving this hill without the rest of these guys is if you carry me off here, because I'm not leaving. And so he said, well, appreciate that. And
So you were still, could you still get around with that?
Yeah,
in your man?
yeah. It was sort of funny because when I got hit, my hit was minor. It actually was. I ended up spending 3 weeks in the hospital, but that was kind of typical of things.
Yeah.
But I got clipped in the back as I was diving for cover on the hilltop, and the only thing I could equate it to or relate it to was being hit by a pitch ball. When I was a kid playing baseball, when you're a little kid, you get hit by a pitch. Well, the pros get hit by a pitch. It hurts, and it really thumped me pretty good. And I was afraid to put my hand back there. During the day, sometime I had Doc Finley look at it, and he said, "Oh, you're okay," because I was afraid there would be a big. It hurt bad enough that I thought there was a chunk missing back there. And so anyhow, we stayed the day, and we had been through a hell of a lot from that last 2 days. And I want everybody to know, though, that Delta Company did not quit at all. And I resent that.
Now, were you aware of Delta Company of 2506 coming in, or do you find out later there are these other guys here, or
No,
were they somewhere else?
They actually came down the same trail that we had come down. They inserted maybe 1,000 meters to what would to me seem to be the northwest. They came in on a hot LZ. They had a guy with I think a foot blown off or something like that. They were carrying him, and they were pretty much intact. And as far as I know, I mean, after I think their LZ was hot, but I believe they had basically come down pretty much after that without any trouble. Rollison was the company commander. The thing I remember him coming into the perimeter, and he and Ranger exchanged greetings, and Ranger said something to the effect, "So you're a Ranger too?" And Rollison said, "You ain't just bullshitting," and that
Yeah.
he was a real hard charger.
Yeah.
They went to the other side of the LZ and secured the south side of the LZ, and after they got there, basically very little happened. I mean, I read things in the book, but we didn't see any hard combat after Delta Company from 2nd of 06 arrived.
Okay. But something does happen to Workman, though.
Well, as we were extracted, they told us we were going to be extracted. And again, my mind is on these guys on the hill.
Mhm.
Couldn't believe that we were leaving them. We had 2 guys, I think it was, in our perimeter, my medic and another guy that I didn't really know, that were wrapped up, and we were going to bring them out with us.
Mhm.
And so Ranger told me he wanted me out on the first bird. He sent me across the LZ as the birds were approaching. Me and my RTO and somebody else that I don't remember. First bird comes in. I look up and there's this guy named Perry. He was a brother, and he had captured one of those pith helmets, NBA helmets. And I look up, and here he comes running this way to the helicopter with his pith helmet on, and I cracked up, and the bird came in. We piled on and lifted off, but this time another bird had been shot down, and the LZ was pretty tight by this time. So we're having to, and there's all kinds of crap out here, so they had to lift off backwards, so the birds would lift off, turn, and head back this way. And you had a constant 3-point exercise like that. No contact with anybody until we got back to Evans, but apparently the 4th bird, I believe it was coming in, got shot up by 50 cal, lost control, and crashed on the LZ. Now, again, I think Ranger's reputation was besmirched, and I don't appreciate that. Ranger was not trying to get off that LZ. He was directing traffic. The last time I saw him, he was standing erect, just like Ranger, and directing traffic, pushing guys out. McCoy told me just a while ago, he had to kick his butt to make him get out on the LZ because people were shooting.
Yeah.
But I talked to the helicopter crew the next day in the hospital, and they said that they knew they were crashing, and that they were trying to wave our guys back, and so just, it didn't happen, and it crashed very near him, and he was cut too. Didn't know that, of course, at the time. Got back to the company area, got off the helicopter. First Sergeant Stubbs comes over to me and says, Ranger didn't make it. Couldn't believe it. But it happened. And so I stood out there until all of our guys were in. It was a somber mood. They told me I ought to go to Charlie Bed or whatever it was to get checked out, and I did. Got down there, and I guess I had not eaten all day in a week. And they x-rayed my back, rolled me off the table, and when I stood up, so they hauled my butt to Fubai. And that was quite an experience. That triage area, similar to what the TV show MASH. I mean, the helicopter lands, you got these guys running out there to pick up, and they had all kinds of casualties on the helicopter. And from the time I got unloaded off the helicopter, it was probably 30 seconds at most till I was in an air-conditioned triage area, and absolutely stripped, completely naked. They took scissors and started up here and went cut right through your belt, your pants, and of course we didn't wear underwear or anything like this, so I'm laying here naked in front of God and everybody, all in a period of about less than a minute,
Mhm.
you know, and they, you know, ran me through surgery, and a couple days later got sent down to the Air Force Hospital in Cameron Bay. Those guys had it made down there. Paved streets, street lights. Thompson and I got kicked out of an officers club down there because he didn't have socks on. And I'm going, this war has gone on too long, you know. But we were down there about 3 weeks. And then we got out of the hospital and they said, go back to your unit. And we were on our own. I mean, we had to find our own transportation back up there.
So how did you get back up?
Well, yeah, we managed to catch a flight to Fubai, and then when we got to Fubai, which was the in-processing center again, we couldn't get a connection. We went out to Highway 1 and started doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Vietnamese, one of those Lambros or whatever they call them, came by. I mean, they had pigs and chickens and 50 people in that little thing. Stopped. Yeah, no. And finally, somebody in a Jeep picked us up, and we rode through Way and on up to Camp Evans, and showed up in the company area, and nobody. In fact, they thought we had been sent back to the States. They were getting ready to package our stuff up, but they just, that was a frequent problem I've heard, that once somebody got sent out on a medical issue like that, the company didn't know what was going on. And so, you know, we walked back in the company area, and the company was rebuilding again, and it was a pretty good day.
All right. Now, how long do you actually stay with the company then once you're back?
Once I was back, I stayed with the company maybe another, maybe 2 months, a little over a month. We were, I think they call it a swing battalion or something like that. Anyhow, for a while, we just drifted around throughout the 101st AO, went to some other fire bases, some other AOs, worked a couple weeks down there, came back and went to Fontaine, just off Evans Wire, and started hiking across country. I had only been out of the hospital a couple weeks and passed out in the heat, so I got pulled the rear again for overnight, pumped full of fluids. While I was there, the battalion XO said, "What'd you major in college?" "Accounting." Asked 2 or 3 other questions, and I answered them. I didn't know what he was getting at. So one of the captains said, "What, are you interviewing for a job or something?" I said, "No." And they said, "Well, they need a property book officer. Lieutenant David's getting ready to D-Rose and need somebody to replace him. Would you be interested in it?" I thought for about 10 seconds. Well, yeah, I think so. And so I took that job. And as luck would have it, that is a slot that is normally filled by a warrant officer. And the property book officer basically is responsible for all of the TA-50, all of the property that's assigned to the company, and or the battalion, I guess it is. And so anyhow, took that job, and before we did the inventory, because you had to inventory and sign for all that stuff, before they did the inventory, a warrant officer showed up, and so then that's when they said, "Well, we're going to form a security platoon here in the rear, and if you'd be interested in doing that, what you'd be doing is maintaining the bunker line for our sector, Blue CP, and pulling guard duty every night, and we're going to do it instead of what they used to do was have a duty roster in the company, and every night the company would send their quota of 4 people or 8 people, wherever it was. But we think it might work better if we just make a platoon, a security platoon, and you've got the same guys all the time. They're in their same positions. They're maintaining it during the afternoon and pulling guard all night. And again, hot chow, yeah, I can handle that. Bad move. Because the first sergeants got rid of all their riffraff that way. So I had every pothead and yahoo in the battalion trying to maintain a bunker line. I had court-martial Article 15, a bunch of people had a lot of issues. Was threatened more than once. Meanwhile, my son had been born, and I kind of those. I guess it was in early March, something like that. Got into a confrontation with one of the guys, and I went to battalion commander and said, "I'm not going to do this crap anymore. I'm not fooling with these clowns. I'm going to go back to the field." And so he said, "Well, we've got a convoy going up to Vandegrift tomorrow. Our battalion had moved up to support Lamson, and so we'll go up and see the colonel tomorrow." So I took a convoy up Highway 1, Quantree, and then down what they call Ambush Alley, Highway 9. Did not get ambushed, felt very good because we had air cover with us all the way, but we did run into an area. It was sort of funny. We came over this hill and around a curve, and there's MPs on the ground and just machine gun, and machine gun ammo is clipped together, little metal clips. So when it fires, those little metal clips just fly everywhere. And those guys looked at us like, "What the hell are you all doing driving through this area?" Because they had just been ambushed, But it was secure, and we went on. So I got up there and fiddled around for a day or two, and the S3 Air got shot down. He was in a loach, and he was going around locating bunkers, dropping hand grenades in them. And he leans down and drops a hand grenade, and before he can get rid of it, an AK comes pointing out of there and shot the bird up sufficiently that it landed hard, and it messed his back up. So he said, "Well, you want to do that for the next 2 months?" And I said, "Yeah, I can handle that." So I, again, lived on the Firebase. Firebase is not as dangerous as it was in the field, but you're still out there, and enjoyed it. And then when I left, I felt very conflicted. Felt like I was bugging out on my guys. The job wasn't done,
Can you just describe a little bit what you did as S3 Air for?
S3 Air would coordinate air support. We would coordinate with the S4, and supposed to be part of the planning when we're going to do a CA. You would coordinate the helicopters for that, working with the S3, and determining what kind of support you're going to need, require how many ships and that kind of stuff, where you're going to be located. Basically, it was not a bad job, but I never did really get comfortable in that job either, because I knew what a platoon leader did, but I didn't know what an S3 Air did.
All right. Well, did you have to go around in a loach and drop hand grenades on people, or was he doing that in his spare time?
The only thing that I did in in that regard was we would go around, and if you wanted to, if you had a company operating in an area and you wanted to flush somebody out before they walked into it, you know, you do things. Sometimes you would fire it up with ARA, and what I did several times was would mark what we called a suspected enemy location, an SEL. What caused it to be a suspected enemy location was that it was in Vietnam and you wanted to put some napalm down there. So you go around and I would drop a Willie Pete grenade. And
So white phosphorus.
the white smoke would come up, and then a team of Chinook and a Cobra would come in, and the Chinook would drop napalm in barrels under a sling loaded napalm. He'd drop that, and the Cobra would fire it up with rockets, and you get this huge fireball of napalm. And you know, if there had been anything in the area, it was pretty effective. But like a lot of things over there, I don't know how effective it really was.
All right. So you've kind of experimented with a lot of different jobs there. When you were back at Evans and you had the guys in the bunker line, you had issues with marijuana. Did you have black power issues? Were there black troops there who would rather be doing something else?
You had all of those, yes. The marijuana and heroin were pretty common. You would have people OD on heroin. Just, I mean, one day there's a guy just walking through the battalion area and just passed out. And I don't recall any deaths, but heroin overdose were common. Marijuana was more common. I had a lot of issues on the bunker line with that, and I mean, I played cop a lot. You know, learned to read people their rights and take them away, and then they would be subjected to either non-judicial or court-martial. And at the same time, you're living with these guys. So it was not a pleasant experience. Racial issues were not uncommon at all. They were very pronounced. But this time, again, you know, you're getting the reflection of the American society in there, and you had everything. I mean, you really had everything. You had a lot of times the black troops, and not a whole lot different than it is now. I mean, the black troops tend to hang together, and the white troops tend to hang together. There was friction between the groups. As a lieutenant, I even experienced that in Fort Riley. We went on riot duty one time when you don't remember this, but there was a thing called the moratoriums, and the peace movement had told the commander at the I cannot remember, Rock Island Army Arsenal in the middle of the Mississippi River, that they were going to come on base and read a list of the names of all the people that had been killed in Vietnam. And he said, no, you're not coming on base to do that. So they said they were coming on base. So out of the blue, the company I was in from Fort Riley was selected to go up there and secure the base. And after there wasn't really a confrontation, they did not follow through on their threat to confront the troops. So the next night, we were on the bridge and stuff all night on each end of the island. And the next night, then they had a party for us. And the senior brass took off to their own party at the officers club and left 3 or 4 lieutenants in charge of the enlisted men. And so, you know, alcohol starts flowing and one thing leads to another. And all of a sudden there's a senior NCO and another lieutenant into it. And they come to get me and said, you got to come out here, this lieutenant and sergeant into it. Get out there, and by this time, I mean, the N word is being uttered around, and it's a nasty scene. People are starting to flood out, and you got the black troops starting to form up over here, and the white troops. It was a very tense situation. And, you know, we said, party's over, we're going back to the barracks. And got back to the barracks. Another confrontation, you know, and again, me and another lieutenant are trying to quell the riot, you know. People ended up getting court-martial over that. Racial strife was very common at that point, even in the States, and it was probably increased over there. Typically what would happen is you had this hardcore bunch, and the new guys come in, and, you know, they immediately pounce on them. Because again, I mean, it's understandable, you kind of hung together, you know, and they would be a bad influence on them. And there were, I mean, I've heard of other issues. I did not have any personal experience with really confrontation. You would have, you know, I've always been racially, I think, a fairly liberal kind of person. I could never see the treatment that the black people had received as being acceptable. I would talk to the black troops and try to reason, you know. You don't always win those arguments, but I did have a rapport with them. And you had a few that stayed the course, and stayed with the program. Without calling names, you know, I had at least one in my platoon that was just a super guy. He was just a good person. I don't care what color he was a good guy, you know. I had others in my platoon that when they got to the rear, they went off the track. And I could still talk to them, but they were just not going to listen.
Yeah.
So it was the Army in Vietnam in 1970 was not a comfortable place to be at all.
But they do seem to have been, at least certainly in the field, still doing their jobs.
Yes. The ones that stayed up, what would typically happen is a lot of times they'd find a way to, I mean, again, they're being coached by these jailhouse lawyers here in the rear, and they find a way to get a profile. They hurt, you know, they get hurt, they go to sick call, and they're there. Once they got to the rear, if they ever got to the rear, you could pretty much kiss them goodbye. As long as they were in the field, everyone, despite no one wanting to be the last guy killed in Vietnam, everyone was willing to do their part in the field because they felt like the best way to, your best chance of going home is to be on the ball, you know.
Yeah. All right, so you've kind of gone through all this range of stuff. Now, when does your tour in Vietnam come to an end?
I guess it was like in May. I don't really remember exactly when it was. It was, but it was in late spring.
Okay, 71.
Of 71, yes.
Yeah. All right. And then what's the process for getting you back to the States?
Process out through Benoit. I was there maybe 2 days. Came back to SeaTac and flew home to Kentucky.
And when you flew home, did you do that in uniform?
Yes, absolutely.
And did you have any problems getting there?
I had no problems. I've heard of
Yeah.
people having problems, but to be perfectly honest, I wasn't in any mood for problems. And, you know, I guess I was arrogant enough to feel like that if someone wanted to mess with me, all 150 pounds of me, that I wasn't going to have problems. And I've heard of people taking uniforms off stuff. Not
Yeah.
me. I had my CIB and my Screaming Eagle, and I was going home
All right.
to hold my son.
Okay. But you get back home, but you're just on leave. You've got another year left in the Army, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So what assignment do you get now that you're back?
I was reassigned to Fort Campbell, which is like kind of sort of a homecoming for me, about 30 miles from where I graduated from high school. When I reported in, they all thought I was advance party because the rumors had already started that, you know, Hearn First was coming back there. But at the time, the host unit, I think they call it, for Fort Campbell was the United States Army Training Center. And so I was assigned to a battalion in the training center. There I was put into an S3 slot, promoted to captain, and stayed there until they closed the training center, actually. We were phased down in, I want to say April of '72, just about a month before, maybe 2 months before I left the Army.
Now, this training center, is this basic training or is this?
Basic training, yes. Operating 8-week cycles, have a cycle break, take in another group, run through. I think I went through 3 cycles while I was there.
And were there any particular kind of problems or issues or interesting things about that job?
No, the training center, I mean, you're getting new guys in there. This is about the time VOLAR started, which is a volunteer army. And the morale in the Army was low. I mean, but for the career officers, and in a way I still consider myself a career officer, but even though I knew I was going to get out, it wasn't that bad. Training center was okay. Troops were basic trainees. I mean, they didn't know squat when they showed up, and your job was to turn them into soldiers. And I worked in the S3 shop, and really, the S3 shop was, I probably didn't do a very good job, but it was go to work every day and fill out a few reports, and go out and look at the training and see what's going on, and pass along any changes to training and this sort of thing. That was also at the time when there was a sort of resentment, I guess, because basic training was changing from the hazing, shout in your ear kind of thing to a more, well, less hazing.
Yeah.
I would say less hazing. I mean, my guess is basic training is still not the most pleasant experience in the world, but it's a lot different than it used to be. It used to be that drill sergeant was one bad dude, you know, and they had very little regard for whether or not a trainee was happy in his status, and it's changed a lot since then. But there's a lot of change going on in the Army at that time.
So do you have older, experienced drill sergeants who just didn't like what was going on, or?
Well, most of the drill sergeants by that time were nearly all combat veterans, or at least Vietnam veterans. You did not have to be in the combat arms to be a drill sergeant. You went to drill sergeant school to be, basically you were a teacher, is what the thing was. So I had medics, I had all different MOSs that were drill sergeants, and as far as I know, all of them had been to Vietnam, but again, a guess, I'll bet half of them were not from combat arms.
Because the majority of people in the Army, substantial majority, were something other than combat infantry.
That's correct.
So you had a lot of other people. All right. Now, and do you have another, you say they shut down the training center. Did you have another assignment before you left? Or?
The 101st came back,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe it was April. I left in June,
Mm-hmm.
June the 9th. And as what I felt like my good fortune would have it, I was reassigned to the 1st and the 506th when it was brought back to Fort Campbell. I was the S4 officer for, like I said, maybe a month.
Yep.
In that battalion, and they brought back a skeleton crew, and we sent out teams to recruit. They called it one station unit training. The companies were very much a skeleton crew, and we sent out recruiting teams to actually recruit and conduct basic training, AIT, at one site to build up the unit to strength. And of course you had some people coming in, but it was mainly new recruits that was building up the strength.
All right. So now you get in the middle of 1972, you are out of the Army. Now what do you do?
Not happy. I started scouting around for a job, sold insurance for a year, finally starved to death doing that, and the guy I was working for had a friend who was owned a brick company. He was looking for someone to run his office, and we connected up, and I went there temporarily. I was going to complete my degree work and move on because Stanton, Kentucky is a town of about 2,000, and I had grown up in a town about like that, and I didn't want anything to do with a small town. So I was going to complete my degree and move on to the big time, and I ended up staying there 30 years. But I did get in the reserves after a while, a short period of time, and stayed in the reserves for 3 years. I hated the reserves as much as I liked the Army. I guess I wanted to play Army. In the reserves was a training. They even, to add insult to injury, they reclassed us from infantry to armor.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to go to Fort Knox and learn to operate tanks and stuff like that. And I didn't like that at all, and I was just glad to finally resign and get away from it.
All right. Now this tape